computer. Perfect. Well, welcome everyone to our third Friday legal webinar for the month of May. My name is Sandra Vidrio and I'm representing here the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. I want to say thank you to everyone that is joining us in the Zoom call the day of today, as well as those that are joining through Facebook Live. Our topic for today is going to be on the pros and cons of forming a limited liability company. We are joined, our presenter for today will be William Kell, who is the director at the New Business Community Law Clinic at the University of Berkeley. Before getting started, I would like to remind you to please use the chat tools to submit any questions or comments or reactions during the presentation. So if you're using a computer, simply locate the chat option on your computer screen. And if you're using a tablet, you will have to select the option that says more. And then of course, well, language interpretation, but the chat option. And I also want to share that we are having, during the Zoom meeting, we have Spanish interpretation available. Así que si usted se está conectando usando la plataforma de Zoom y quisiera escuchar la presentación de hoy en español, está la interpretación simultánea disponible. Así que seleccione donde dice más en su pantalla de ya sea teléfono o tableta y después donde dice lenguaje de interpretación. Asegúrese de seleccionar el lenguaje en español y silenciar el audio para que se escuche solamente en español. Así que cualquier pregunta, deje su comentario en el chat y nosotros le tratamos de ayudar. I would like to say thank you to each of the following companies for their commitment and support towards the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation to allow us to continue bringing these weekly webinars every week to our small business community, not just here in the city of Fresno, but throughout the San Joaquin Valley and anyone that's connecting outside of the area. So thank you once again to each one of you. And thank you to Bank of America, Comcast, Bank of the West, Chevron, FHL Bank San Francisco, Donna G. Sales, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase & Company, Tri-Counties Bank, and Union Bank. Thank you for your support. And this is our agenda for today. And as a reminder, I wanted to share with you that the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation is here to help and assist you in your business needs. So if you are someone that's wanting to start a small business, looking for that right permit and license, we can help you connect and receive the information and also help you with the application process. So feel free to give us a phone call. I know we have virtual technical assistants here, and we are now allowed to meet one-on-one in person by appointment only. So feel free to give us a phone call if you're wanting to connect and receive any resources, or if you're looking for funding opportunities, grant opportunities, or looking to apply for a microloan, if that's the case, to be able to reopen your business. We have some programs available for you as well. And as always, our weekly webinars are continuing. So if you have a topic that you would like for us to invite a speaker to present on, please post it on the chat box, comment section, or on Facebook Live, leave a comment on future topics that you would like to hear from. Here is our contact information, our address, our website, and make sure to follow us on our social medias to keep up to date with our continuous programming. And now I have the pleasure of welcoming Bill, who will be providing today's presentation. And Bill, you are now the host, so you should be able to share your screen. So let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, folks. Let's get to share screen here. Thanks for inviting me here. Really excited to talk about limited liability companies. It's one of the few things that I think somehow the law missed making these things really complicated. I mean, it's one of the main things we've always had trouble with is just getting into business is so difficult and complex. And a limited liability company is one of those friendly, easy to form kind of entities that I just think it's a great thing. So let's cover a little bit about what that's involved with. I'll try and answer some of your questions, but best to put those in the chat and we'll try and address those at the end. And Raina, am I keeping up with you in terms of immigration interpretation? Are we good? Okay. All right, well, good, folks. Well, so here's our agenda for today. I'm going to try and cover this in about 30 minutes if I can. We talked about forming an LLC, but it's also a little bit more about, why do you form a limited liability company? There's lots of reasons for doing so, but I've picked out sort of the best 6 that I can think of, okay? So limited liability companies help you limit your liability. That's what I call it. the LLC. We'll talk about each of these in order here. Helps you raise capital with banks and with investors. It helps you get some tax breaks. Wait a minute. Oh dear, hold on. Sorry, I just had for some reason a phone call just jumping in there. Just stop. Okay. Sorry, I don't know how it jumped in on my meeting there. Anyway, sorry. So helps you limit liability, raise capital, a number of tax breaks that you can take advantage of. It is very important for sole proprietors and those who are self-employed to form an entity like this. There are other entities you could form, but this is one of those entities that helps you comply with the new contractor laws that limit so many people when they're trying to hire a contractor or be a contractor these days. So this is a good thing for the LLC there. It helps set up profit sharing arrangements, and for that, that's particularly important for folks who may be undocumented because they may have limited right to work, but they don't have limited rights involved in sharing profits from their business. Anybody can own a business and get profits from it. So this is a very important way that immigrant entrepreneurs, if they don't have legal status, can earn profits for their families. And finally, the thing I love the most about the LLC is just it's so easy to change it, to modify it, and make it work just the way you need it for your business. It's also easy to sell it or dissolve it going forward. It's also easy to change it into a corporation if you need to do that down the way. So we'll cover a few those things as well. Finally, next thing, there's a couple of small limitations on who can form an LLC. So we'll definitely get into that. Generally, it's that if you need a license to do what you're doing, then it's going to be difficult to do that through an LLC, but we can get into that a little bit more later. But that's one of the main limitations on it. And then, of course, at the end, how to form an LLC in California. We also can help you form an LLC in Delaware if that's something that's an issue, but generally LLCs we're going to cover today are going to be the ones in California. So just a reminder, of course, this presentation is just general legal information. It doesn't constitute legal advice. And of course, always talk with an attorney about your specific situation before you take any action, okay? All right, well, let's get right to it here. Why do you form this LLC? I've already previewed you some of those reasons, but here I'll go into it a little bit more. You know, probably one of the most important things that an LLC does is it creates separation between you and the business. So that means that if somebody sues the business, they're less likely to find you on the hook for those business obligations because, you know, they're suing the company. You have separate status once you create the LLC from that LLC, and that way, you know, create this shield of protection around you and your family and your assets. LLCs can easily take on investment from a number of places, you know, family, friends, angels. It can also acquire debt and create its own credit history as well. So that's another really good thing. Going forward, people usually can't just invest in you, and banks often, you know, are looking for people to lend to that have maybe a clean credit history. Maybe you know, we all have credit histories that could be better. So this is a way to create a new credit history that you can then take on debt around. Then you're talking about tax breaks. This thing we'll talk about in a few minutes is pass-through taxation. That means that the owners of the LLC can generally realize a lot of benefits on their own taxes going forward. And, you know, that particularly focuses on the way you can offset losses from the LLC against other income that you may be earning. So we'll go into that a little bit. Here's that restrictive AB5 law that I'm talking about, this new, what we call the ABC test that has restricted so many people from being classified as an independent contractor. Fortunately, once you become an LLC, it essentially lifts you out of those restrictions in a way, because in many ways you're going to be a business, not an individual anymore. And that way you can have a business to business model for the way you're providing your business activities. So that's something we'll cover as well. And as I mentioned, if you're undocumented, the LLC is critical for helping you earn profits rather than compensation, which would be limited to, if you don't have right to work. And finally, LLCs are easy to change because they are formed by an agreement that can always be amended. It's easy to sell it, easy to dissolve it or change it into something else. Okay, so let's go through each of these one at a time. First of all, this separation that I'm talking about here. Okay, well, what you should know is that if you're in business and you haven't formed a legal entity, by default, the law will treat you as one of these kinds of entities. It's almost like you've chosen by not choosing. Okay, so you're either a sole proprietor, if you're just a single person, or you're a married couple, or you're a partnership if you have two or more founders in the entity. Why is this an issue? Well, neither of these kinds of entities have this limited liability shield. Okay, and so what does that mean? Well, here's what it means. Okay, by default, limited liability means that everybody in business is on the hook for their business's obligations personally. So that means that if you have a lawsuit, hopefully you have some insurance that will help pay for any damages that lawsuit will create. But if you don't have enough resources in your bank account, your business bank account or insurance, then you're still going to have to come up with the other amounts of those damages that a lawsuit might bring you from your personal assets. That's everything: your house, your car, your college fund. It's scary, very scary. But limited liability, if you formed an entity that is separate from you, then the people suing you can only get to the resources that you put into the business. They can't come after you personally, except in a few exceptions that we'll cover in a minute. So what does that mean? Okay, well, so let's say you have a company delivery truck, runs somebody over. For whatever reason they ran over, could be they were texting, could be the person just jumped out and it was not the fault of the driver anyway. So that person sues the company. Who could be liable in this situation? Well, if you don't have limited liability, then all of these people are on the hook potentially. The business itself, the driver, note the driver is always on the hook for their own negligence, okay? It's just whether the company is going to be able to back them up. And if you don't have any limited liability, well, everybody is essentially in that truck, together. The business, the driver, the owners of the company, any people who have equity stakes in the company, shareholders, things like that. So if you do have limited liability, then the two that are in the hook are the business itself, but only up to the resources of the business, okay, the bank account of the business, not the leadership of the business, not the owners of the business, and the driver themselves. So as I said, it may be that the driver, if they were acting, reasonably and everything like that, can get indemnification from the company's insurance policy, okay? But ultimately, the company is only on the hook for that, what they have in terms of insurance and what is in the bank. Okay? Now, there's a couple of exceptions. The most important one is this idea of personal negligence. Remember, I mentioned that the driver in this situation is always on the hook, so they wouldn't. Even if you were the head of a delivery company, you couldn't form an LLC to protect you from your negligence as a driver. Okay, similarly, as an attorney, I can't set up a shield around myself for bad advice, or a doctor for bad medical care. All that you can do in that situation is get professional liability insurance it's usually called errors and omissions insurance coverage. And that will cover sort of errors in judgment, things that happen, you know, everybody makes a mistake now and then as a professional. And so that's what that insurance policy is for. But it's not as though you could create a limited liability shield so you wouldn't be, you know, you wouldn't be liable for your own negligence. That just wouldn't work, you know, public policy wise. Now, there's a few other ways that the limited liability shield might not work for you. If you personally guaranteed something, yeah, you got a loan from a bank, they might require you to make a personal guarantee that it'll be paid back. Well, yeah, okay, then in that situation, the shield won't work either. If you're trying to intentionally harm somebody, insufficient entity formalities. What I mean by that is, let's say you didn't stick around till the end of our presentation day and you didn't know how to form an LLC. Well, let's say that you said, well, I'm just going to form my LLC by writing it down. Okay, we're going to write down that we have an LLC. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't form an LLC. That will form maybe a partnership, but an LLC has to be formed at the state level by registering it, and we'll tell you more how to do that. So if you didn't actually form your limited liability entity, then of course you can't rely on the shield to protect you. Undercapitalization is another aspect. We always tell people to put some money into your LLC when you get started, or get some insurance, because it's a little bit, well, think of it this way. Let's say you were trying to start a car company, you know, a new electric car company, okay? And you started it with $10,000. All right, well, the first accident that happens with one of your car company, your cars produced by the company, is probably going to have more liability than $10,000. So undercapitalization just means you have enough assets in the bank as a company or insurance to take care of whatever claims happen in your in doing the business that you're doing there. So those are some of the main ones. If the leadership starts, you know, acting, you know, unreasonably, asleep at the wheel, things like that can also cause this limited liability shield to fall. But generally, limited liability shield that the LLC provides you is a good shield, and you can sleep at night. You want to get some insurance, of course, on top of it to make sure that's your sort of front line, and then you can walk away. It's a sort of a backstop if anybody ever sues you. All right. So number two, they can take on investment or acquire debt. They can have their own credit history. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about how you would get capital. Okay, first I'd say, you know, these are some different sources where you get it from: founders, family, friends, banks, equity investors. Maybe you get some grants or government or things like this. And of course, you're using it. You need it to start your business, maybe some ongoing expenses. Maybe the ongoing revenue doesn't create enough cash flow for you, things like that, or improvements that you need to make. And your job as an entrepreneur is always to find the right balance between these three sources. You know, the funds from you that you don't need to pay back, but yeah, you can't bankrupt your family to do your business there. So those are the trade-offs there. With debt, you don't have to give up any control over your business, but you do have to pay this thing back, even if you go out of business. And equity, you know, here's the thing. My brother-in-law created the first company called pets.com that evolved eventually into, well, now Chewy. We get Chewy for our dogs like every day, and it's doing really, really well. But pets.com folded, and we gave him a couple of thou for that. But did he have to pay it back? No. But you know, as shareholders, we only had a very limited amount of shares, so we couldn't really control the company. But all their investors, you know, exercised lots of control over the company. So this is the balance you got to find, or the right balance from these three sources here. So how can the LLC help? Well, LLCs work very well with these kinds of capital. Founders' contribution, friends and family, debt, angels as well, because angels tend to not be looking to overly control the company, or they're generally not looking for humongous profits from their investment there. Whereas in contrast, venture capitalists don't tend to invest in the LLCs. So this is one of the downsides of the LLC. If you're looking for, you know, these kinds of investors that want 10 to 15 times their investment paid back in 2 years, and they have a lot of control over your entity, okay? And they're going to potentially have enough shares to be able to force you to do stuff, okay? They're not going to be so happy with an LLC. Why is that? Because there's liquidity involved. And what I mean by liquidity is that they have the ability to make changes in the company to get their investment out at different points, okay? So in an entity that has majority rule as a decision-making default, like in a corporation, you just have to own 51% of it, that'll be easier to control and make changes to create liquidity for the investors than an LLC, where generally a new member coming in, a new investor coming in, has to be approved by all of the other members. So there's unanimity in many of the major decisions that an LLC has to get from its members. Okay, so that's why venture capitalists are not so keen on LLCs. But what we say is, if an LLC, if the VCs aren't in your future in the next, I don't know, year and a half, something like that, you might think of starting as an LLC, and then when they start circling around, convert to a corporation, which is what they're probably going to want to see. And in fact, the VCs, if they like you enough, they might even pay for you to convert at that point. So that means that then you get the benefits of the LLC at the beginning, that, pass through of losses, the flexibility, all these other things I was talking about. And then when you need to create a corporate entity for the venture capitalists, then, it's easy to change over. Okay, a couple other things on investment or debt. How would we make this happen? Okay, well, in terms of investment, okay, this is one of the beauties of the LLC, is that if you have people who just want to invest and get in on the entity itself, yeah, well, you can do that by just simply adding them to this operating agreement that you're going to create with the LLC. We'll go into that a little bit more, what the operating agreement includes, but it's simply having them sign on to an agreement going forward. It's very easy. And you can add more when you want to, again, assuming everybody's in agreement on that. Now, outside investors, you could have them come into the operating agreement, or you could actually have a separate funding instrument that is more like an obligation of the LLC, rather than sort of a profit sharing arrangement around insiders. That's what you'd have for the members. But for the outside investors, tend to use what's called a convertible note, which is in a sense a loan that is then converted into equity. It's a way for investors to get involved at an early stage when nobody really knows what the company is worth at that point. So what they can do is they can put their money in. Let's say I put in, $50,000 to this LLC. And that's where I'd say, okay, well, as soon as there's a first funding event with major funding, you're going to take into account my initial contribution, which I made at this very risky time. There was nobody else who was giving you investment at this point. So you're going to give me a discount rate in exchange. So if a share of the LLC at the first funding event is $10 a share, then you're going to give it to me for $8 a share. Okay, because of my getting in early, you see. And that deal is also going to be subject to a cap. So what that means is if, we set a cap, let's say $2 million, but maybe my business is really taking off and suddenly we've got $20 million in investment. Well, my deal only will apply up to the first $2 million in terms of getting a big share of the company up to $2 million. That's the cap, that's the discount rate coming together. And then the conversion event is, okay, usually the first major financing, what they call Series A, is where then you have the option to convert what would have been a loan into this equity share of the LLC. Okay. All right, then taking on debt's a little simpler, okay, from members or from outside lenders, it doesn't matter. You would use what's called a promissory note, which is essentially a loan document that has these three terms, you know, how much did you loan the company, what's the interest rate, and when do you have to pay it back by. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, now a couple of things to note. Personal guarantees, as I said earlier, remember that does not lift you out of the requirement to repay the debt or the investment if you personally guaranteed that you're going to pay people back. So watch that part. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the tax breaks. Okay, well, you got your LLC entity and you got your members of the LLC here. This is how it works. First, LLCs by nature pass through profits to the members. So how does that work? Well, you got your gross income of the LLC. You subtract the business expenses, it's, you know, ordinary, customary business expenses, your insurance, your rent, cost of creating inventory, things like that. And then you get your what's called adjusted gross income or profit. And then what happens is then that is passed through, it goes to the entity, but it keeps going. It doesn't stay in the entity, it is passed through to the members. And the entity itself is not treated as a taxpayer. It just reports the profits on its tax return and then allocates it through a Schedule K to the members, who then pay tax on the income that they got from that in their individual tax returns according to their tax bracket. So this is, and there's also a 15% deduction in there as well for the LLC entity before they, as part of the business expense process there. That means that the LLC actually gets a tax break, even though it's not a taxpayer, before the income is distributed to the members there. Okay, but you know, this also works on the loss side too. Okay, so let's say you had this much gross income and then you had this much expenses. Okay, then when you deducted that, when you subtracted it, you'd have losses. Okay, well, that passes through as well. You send that through the LLC, they report it on the tax return for the LLC, and then the losses come through as well to the members according to their share of the, you know, the distributions. And here, what's really great is that the members, the owners of the business, then can offset their income, you know, income from other sources with these losses, and then pay less tax going forward. Okay, and just so you know, if you had a corporate entity here, this would not happen. This pass-through wouldn't happen. All of the losses would be held here in the entity, and there'd only be certain circumstances when the entity could realize those losses in future years. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that this is also a good deal for new businesses, because again, most of the time losses are going to be happening in the first year. Okay, let's see. Now, number 4, becoming an LLC does help you comply with California's new restricted contractor laws. So this is what was called AB 5 in 2020. It started just as the pandemic was coming down. And what it was a way of saying, okay, look, we've had some abuses in the state of California, like Uber and Lyft, characterizing people as employees who should be contractors. We're going to make it harder for people to classify somebody as an independent contractor. So that's hurt small businesses in 2 ways. I mean, they can't hire independent contractors very easily. Sorry, my animation is going along on itself. They can't hire independent contractors as easily. And if they themselves are trying to provide business as an independent contractor, they're going to be less able to be hired until they pass this ABC test or find an exemption from the test. And the risk is, this is why so many people are up in arms about it, is that this goes back 4 years. And so you should know that Uber and Lyft, even though they were able to do a public referendum to lift themselves out of this law, they still have all the way back 4 years of hire, okay, until the date that they, you know, the referendum became effective. they are going to have to go back and pay all of their employees, all of their independent contractors as employees, probably at least minimum wage, unpaid taxes, and attorney's fees if they need an attorney to enforce this. Okay, so it's kind of a scary thing for people about hiring contractors and being hired as a contractor. But here's the test that now everybody has to comply with or be exempted from. It used to be that it's just that the hiring entity you had to make sure that they didn't control you very much. That was the first prong that was always in place. Okay, but now these other two aspects are added here. They can't be used to provide regular or continuous services of the business. So what does that mean? If you're a daycare center, your teachers should probably be employees, okay? And what is the core part of your business, or what is regular or continuous parts of your business? And it's a little hard to discern sometimes. But I guess we think of it as, what have you been advertising yourself to be or do for your consumers there? If you're providing daycare, then yeah, the teachers should be daycare teachers, employees. All right, and this final one, independent contractors need to be in business for themselves and to be able to work for others. That's what it says there. See, that's another aspect that is relatively new. Now, why is the LLC important for this? Well, the LLC can help you because you can maybe fill into one of these exemptions from AB5. The particular one I'm thinking of is called the business-to-business contracting relationship. Now, what's important about this is that the business is not providing services directly to the contracting business's customers, only to the contracting business. So let me see, what would be an example of that? Yeah, let's say you got a delivery service that maybe you weren't always providing delivery to people, but a business comes along and says, we'll do your deliveries for you. Okay, well, some might argue that you're actually stepping in and providing the services to the customers of the contracting business. But I think the better way to think of it is you are providing delivery services for, let's say, a bakery trying to get its wares out to people. I think that would probably pass that way. See. And look at all these other things you have to do. You got to make sure that you're holding yourself out to the public as available to provide the same services for others. You can negotiate your own rates. You set your own hours and location of the work. If you can do these things, you're almost all the way there, but you also have to pass this thing called the Borello test. What's the Borello test? Okay, it is essentially saying, okay, even if you've got this exemption from AB5, to be a B2B contractor, they still can't control you very much. Okay, and you should still be providing something that they normally don't do. And the example I always give on this is like a plumber. Okay, you may have the biggest company in the world, but maybe you only need a plumber when your drain stops up, okay? So that's not a customary thing that your company always needs, is a plumber to be on employee status. Instead, you can hire somebody to come in and unstick your drain when you want to, okay? And again, as long as you aren't controlling them, as long as you aren't saying you have to be in our office 9 to 5, instead, they get to negotiate the date they come by. Again, it's better to be also paid by the job instead of your hours, just because, again, the idea here is independent contractors do projects for you. They aren't your employees going forward. Okay, so just know that to fit into this B2B contracting arrangement and lift yourself out of AB5, you form an LLC that shows that you are an independent business. You're not just somebody like an Uber driver coming along and saying, I'll drive for Uber. No, that you have to show that you're able to drive, you're able to do stuff for other people as well. An LLC takes what is normally some scrutiny that sole proprietors and self-employed people would get normally, and pretty much lift you right out of the AB5 ABC test there. Okay. Now, one of the most important things for anybody who's listening who's undocumented is that an LLC is going to be essential for you to do your business. Why? Because it allows you to earn profits from your business. And that's because anybody in the US can own a business. Trump owns all kinds of businesses in Gaza or in Saudi Arabia, but he's not a citizen there. He doesn't have immigration status there. Same thing here. You can own and earn profits from your business even if you do not have the right to work. Okay. Now, and another thing you should just know, and this may be a myth, maybe something you're a little worried about, is that ICE is not looking for people who form businesses and, oh, here's somebody who looks like they might be undocumented. Oh, they just formed a corporation. Let's go get them. No, you know, having an entity, a business entity, has no consequence at all with immigration authorities. Okay. So what do you need to do? Make sure that in your operating agreement, you take credit for the fact that you are a profit sharer and not an employee that is just earning wages. So don't say anything in the agreement about wages. That's not what you're getting paid for. You are getting paid for not your hourly work, but whenever you contribute your know-how and your management skills to the company, you know, on a daily or regular basis, okay? So you shouldn't be doing a time card. You should be, you know, getting profits because of this, that you are contributing to the business, not from your hourly labor, okay? All right, a couple other things you should know is that if you ever face detention or deportation, the LLC, having that in place, is going to make it a lot easier for partners and families to handle your business's affairs, either close it down or keep it going. You can include a plan in your LLC operating agreement. I wouldn't say something like, if I ever get deported. No, I would say, if I'm ever unable to communicate or unable for somebody to reach me, then this is how the business will be managed going forward. And we would tend to recommend that somebody who takes over the business should have legal status, just because when they pick somebody up, they are often looking at other family members, other people connected to them. And so if you have your business, somebody in the business who has citizenship or legal residence in the US, then, you know, the continuation of that business won't be a question. Okay. Finally, you know, LLCs are easy to change, sell, dissolve, or whatever. You always want to have a written operating agreement, even though it's not actually required in the state of California. They will recognize an oral agreement once you have actually filed for this, registered your LLC. But a written agreement is always recommended because it just helps everybody be on board with what are the expectations going forward. So, you know, it's flexible too. You can change those terms anytime you want to, pretty much with the approval of the members. But these are the main terms to arrange at the start, okay? First is contributions. What are people putting into the LLC? Cash, intellectual property, you know, their future work that they're going to put in. Don't want to put past work in, because if you get something in value for past work, then you already got income tax you got to worry about there. So contributions are either cash, property, or future work that they're going to do. Okay. And then the terms of the agreement should also address, okay, well, how are the profits then going to be distributed? If you're putting in a third of the cash, does that mean that you get a third of the profits? Well, it could go that way, but it doesn't have to go that way. It may be that some people can't put in contributions of cash, and instead they're putting in their know-how, and they should still get a full profit distribution of that, okay? Finally, management. How are decisions going to be made? We tend to say, you know, don't do that in terms of just, you know, 3 people and we've got 3 votes, you know, and each person's vote is the same as everybody else's. You could do that, but we're going to suggest in a minute some ways of handling that so that deadlocks are sort of less liable to happen, just because management decisions are already planned for in advance in the operating agreement. Now know that there is this link here that you might want to follow to see what terms in the California LLC or Revised Uniform LLC Act will be filled in for you if you don't address them in your operating agreement. Now, one thing we have done at the end of this slideshow is I've created a Google Drive with four sample operating agreements, different kinds of them. And so those agreements already have taken into account what is in the LLC Act for California and have made changes according to it. But if you just, instead wrote down on a piece of paper, these are the terms of our LLC, well, that would work, but just know that the LLC Act may fill in some stuff if you don't address it. So for example, in California, if the members want to get together in a meeting over the phone, that's okay to do. If you didn't put that into your agreement, then this will still be read into your agreement there. So just know that there are these default provisions in operating agreements if you don't address them. Okay, but other important terms to address, yeah, like how are you going to get through disputes? Are you going to try and negotiate it out? Are you going to try and mediate, get a mediation person to try and work out the deal between you? How will members retire? Or how will you remove them? What if you need to, somebody is just not, somebody dropped off the grid and they haven't been responding, how do you get them out? How do you cash out a departing member? There's different formulas for doing that there. And also then finally, when will members' consent be needed? Generally speaking, any major things that affect the business, new indebtedness, selling major assets, dissolving, anything that's not in the quote ordinary course of the business has to be signed off by the members, certainly amending the operating agreement or getting in new members. Will require consent. Here's a couple of expectations to set to avoid deadlock. Okay, for small matters, well, what we say is, gee, why don't you create some discretion? You have an LLC member or you have a manager of the LLC. Let's give them some discretion to spend money on behalf of the LLC up to a certain amount without member input. It's just going to be hard to get everybody's input on a regular basis. So, $500 in the interests of the LLC without having to check with anybody. Sure. Why don't you give that so that just, the operations can go more smoothly going forward there. We've actually had in here rock, paper, scissors for some of the small things. Why battle everything out? Why not just, go, okay, well, should we purchase this new piece of equipment? Okay, what do you guys think? Okay, rock, paper, scissors. Boom, 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 boom. Just remember to say in the agreement when to throw. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, throw. Okay, we've done that before. For big matters, this is where we might say, okay, well, at the beginning of your life, why don't you think in terms of who's good at what you might have a dispute about? So let's say a marketing plan. Okay, well, who's best at marketing amongst you? Okay, one of you's an MBA, one of you's got a marketing degree. How about we have you try and work it out, but then if there's, you can't work it out, then let's have the person with the marketing chops make the final decision, okay? Or maybe a third party. Let's say you've got two people in the membership of the LLC. Yeah, maybe there's a third party outside that you both agree with, is generally a good person, wise, knows what they're doing. Yeah, name them in the LLC agreement as somebody who could work things out to avoid deadline. Okay, well, let's see. Then a couple other things in the LLC. It's easy to sell the thing. Here's the procedure for selling it. Okay, usually there's a decision to make whether you're going to sell the whole business. That includes all of the obligations, the inventory, the property, the name, the maybe even the ability to rent the space where it's in. That's what's called, usually called a stock sale, but an LLC doesn't really have stock. I guess I would say it's more of a selling of the whole business as opposed to just the assets of the business, because you can sell off different parts of the business as well, equipment, other things like that. And then, of course, the buyer's counsel is going to come along and want to check these things out that they might be buying. Is the property in good shape? Maybe we need a property inspection before we'll close, that sort of thing. Dissolving is actually pretty easy. Members have to vote on dissolving. And then you file your dissolution certificate with the California Secretary of State. And then your last tax return, when you file that, you need to put up at the top of the right of it, last return or final return or something like that. Okay, well, we're almost in the home stretch here. Let's see. Once dissolved, you should just know that the LLC's name becomes available to others to acquire. But if you trademarked that name or any kind of logo or something like that, of course, you still own those until you sell them or abandon them or something like that. Now, in terms of dissolution, just make sure you inform all of these people who might have some connection with the LLC, of course, all employees, landlords, creditors, making sure that everything's paid off, close things, make sure that your consumers know to, if you were going to be doing service for something, that there are other people who will be doing the service for them or available to do the service. So just in terms of dissolution, make sure you sort of cut all of the ties appropriately there. All right, well, one other question that we usually get is it possible to change this LLC into a corporation later? Yes, of course, it's relatively easy to do that. Here's the link that you'd follow to change a California LLC to a California corporation. There's also an easy process in Delaware, a Delaware LLC to Delaware corporation. And if there isn't, if you're in another state or something like that, just know that the basic process is, let's say you want to create a corporation and move your LLC operations into it. Okay, well, first you form the corporation, you take the assets from the existing LLC to buy the controlling share of the new corporation. And then you dissolve the LLC as long as you can do it legally. You'd have to keep it open if there are outstanding lawsuits or contracts that can't be transferred over or stuff. You should just know that when you do sell assets of the LLC, like to create this controlling share in the corporation, that may be that the IRS wants to look at that and say, well, the value of those resources when you acquired them in the LLC has now gone up. And so we're going to tax you on the gain that you realized in that sale there. So it's best to talk with a tax accountant for sure in this conversion process, but also an attorney to make sure you do what you need to do. All right, well, finally, who can form an LLC in California? I think I mentioned that, basically any 18-year-old or over, or an entity can also become an LLC member. We've set up where entities are the members and they're sort of collaborating in kind of a business alliance. That's also a way you could use the LLC. But the one thing that generally you can't do in an LLC is if your business involves a license to do business. Okay, generally that's, so real estate brokerage or something like that, or an attorney. I couldn't form an LLC. I have to form something else, another kind of entity. Usually what we're talking about is if you have a license and you need to form a business around it, you're talking about creating a professional corporation, which is not difficult to do, but it is a little bit more formal. You have to have like a board, filled with all the professionals that, only those professionals who are in with your licensure. It's a little more complicated and formal. So just know that, yes, if you need a license to do your business, here's the sort of analysis here. If you need a license to do your business, probably you're not going to be able to use an LLC. But then there is this exception. It's a little hard to discern, but I gave you an article down here to take a look at it. If you are licensed, but providing what the state of California would say are not professional services, then you might still be able to do the service through the LLC. But if you are licensed and are doing professional services, then again, you won't be able to. Sometimes the statute that licenses you will say whether you can form an LLC or not. For example, it used to be that contractors, general contractors couldn't form LLCs, but now the code has been changed so that a general contractor now can form an LLC if they put up an extra bond amount and a few other things. But here's the article that you might use for this is the first article that I gave you here, the link, what professional or non-professional service may be provided. That actually has a nice list in it of the different professionals that clearly cannot form an LLC. So if you're not gummed up by this licensure thing, now we'll close with how to form that LLC. Okay, well, the first thing you do, it's fairly easy, fairly simple. You just go and register the LLC with the state of California online. This form, it's called the Articles of, it's called the Articles of an Organization. I should have fixed that. Articles of Organization, LLC one, and it's $70, and you file it online at this registration here. And once you file that, that's the starting date for your LLC in California. So if you filed this, let's say anytime in 2021, then you started in 2021, you're going to need a tax return for 2021, even if like only a couple of months are left in it, okay? But then you should also prepare and execute this written operating agreement we were talking about. And again, we identified a few terms that you'd want in that operating agreement. And then, as I said, we've got the templates in the Google Doc in the last slide. But there's sort of three usual arrangements that you might want to fall into here, okay? So let's actually start at the bottom. You're a single person. You're a sole proprietor. You're a self-employed person. You can actually form a single member LLC around yourself to create some separation between you and your LLC. That still gives you all of the benefits we were talking about earlier, except on the tax side, the only thing different there is that the IRS basically says, okay, if it's just a single member LLC, then we don't even pay attention to the LLC in terms of tax time. You just file your 1040 and your Schedule C to do the deduction of your business expenses, and that'll be fine. Okay. Now these other two, the choice here is, do you want to create sort of how would I say it, a management, kind of a hierarchy within your LLC, where somebody manages the day-to-day affairs, makes most of the main decisions, and the other members are mostly passive. Maybe they're just investors who want a profit share going forward. Okay, if you want that kind of two-tiered supervisory arrangement there, then you'd want to do a manager-managed LLC. Okay, day-to-day is run by the manager. You can use an employee to be the manager if you want, but generally they can't make the major decisions like dissolution, selling assets off, and many new members without the consent of the other members. Okay. Or you have a member managed LLC, which is essentially a sort of an equal partnership all the way along. Everybody participates in the business, everybody shares the decision making. So just sort of decide for yourself how you want to arrange this here. And as you can see here, what's easy to do, let's say you start out as a single member LLC, but then somebody comes along and you go, oh, I'd like you to be part of my LLC too. I'm going to continue to manage that LLC, but you can be a passive investor coming in. Okay, great. Then you'd form the manager managed LLC, you see. And just make sure that you then use that operating agreement that we put in the Google Drive for that purpose there. All right, just a few additional filings. Once you've done that, of course, you have a statement of information with the Secretary of State that essentially just sort of says, these are the members. We've also chosen a manager managed function here. The state of California wants to know if you've chosen this extra level of supervision as a manager run LLC. Okay, your local county, city, they may need you to put in a doing business as form, just registering your business with the county, or they may even want you to get a business license that based on your revenue is a sort of a moneymaker for them. That might be for a bigger city or county. But then you'd also want to do these equity issuance notices. We'll cover that in the next slide here, because what you're going to get as an LLC member is what's called a security. And securities are highly regulated by the state and by the feds, so you need to register with them anytime you get an equity share in something. Then, of course, you got your annual tax returns. Okay, here's the 1065 for the federal return, or Form 568 for the state of California. Here's one of the downsides of the LLC. You will have to pay self-employment tax because all the profits that you're coming and getting are going to be treated as income to you. There are some ways that if you are just a passive investor, you don't have any real management role, you might be able to get out of paying that self-employment tax, but talk to an accountant about it. There's this $800 minimum franchise tax that starts in their second year that you have to pay. That's just being the, having the privilege of having this limited liability shield. And then if you make more than $250K a year, there's this other receipts fee that you have to think about. I put the link here to the Franchise Tax Board to tell you a little bit about more of the fees and stuff. But one very important point on the tax return is make sure you know that even if you made no money, even if you lost all kinds of money, the IRS and the state still need you to put in a tax return, and even a partial year tax return. If you formed in November and you didn't have any income for November, December, that's great, but still tell the IRS in California about it. All right, well, I just have, and then finally, this equity thing. Okay, so because you have securities that you are taking as interests in this LLC here, there's a state filing and then there's a federal filing. The problem is these filings don't really talk about anything but stock and shares, but it is an LLC interest that is equivalent to a stock or a share. It's just generally called an ownership unit or something like that. So just know that you have to do these other two filings, generally within 15 days of receiving it. If you miss this filing, it won't be a disaster, but they might give you a little fine for it, a small fine, a couple $100. All right, well, just some helpful resources at the end. Here's some sample operating agreements that we put in this Google Drive folder. So check them out. I gave you a single member. I gave you a member managed, that's sort of egalitarian LLC. Then you got your manager managed LLC operating agreement. That's the one with the hierarchy there. But also LLCs can be a good way to also form a cooperative between different people. So that's another sample that we put in there as well. Nolo Press is always a great legal resource for forming LLCs and taxes and stuff like that. Generally, you always want to be keeping in touch with the Secretary of State and the Franchise Tax Board. Here's some links to those there. Okay, well, guys, we got through it. Questions, here we go. I just want to make sure you know that we have a website to sign up for individual office hours. That's the link to it there. If you want to email me, that's the number to use, newbusinesslaw@berkeley.edu. That's our email address. And then there's also the legal library for entrepreneurs that we have that has a bunch of just free legal information for entrepreneurs, breaks things down for people. That's at ollielegal.com, online legal library for entrepreneurs. Okay, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram too. So that's what we got. I'm thinking good time to look at some chat and see, 22 questions. Let's see what we got.
No worries, Bill. I'll go ahead and help you moderate. First of all, thank you so much for today's insightful presentation. A lot of great content, a lot of great resources. So thank you for today's presentation. And one of the first questions here is that we have on the chat is, it's regarding software recommendations. So what software do you recommend to use to keep track of expenses for our LLC? For an LLC?
Good question. I've heard that QuickBooks has a very good program, or TurboTax. I guess one thing I would tend to say is just make sure that you always have an accountant that you can ask some individualized questions about, because there are ways that you can maximize some of the savings for your individual situation that a TurboTax or QuickBooks isn't gonna get. And I would say also think of the learning curve being, the first year that you do your tax return, you'll know a lot more about the kinds of deductions and things after you get a little bit of input on it. So yeah, hold an accountant in reserve. QuickBooks, TurboTax, I've heard are both really good.
Perfect, thank you. And the other question is regarding hiring workers if you have an LLC entity. So the question is it possible to hire immigrants with an LLC entity?
If they are, I'm assuming you mean an undocumented person. Yeah, if they become profit sharers, yeah, they could be. This is the thing. You'd want them to not be hired as employees, because then you're going to have to do an I-9 on them, and then they'd have to show the right to work in the US. Whereas instead, if you made them profit sharers, and by the way, this doesn't mean that then they would have, equal decision-making power to you. You can always set them up like like in that manager managed LLC kind of arrangement where you make most of the decisions, they get a few decisions that they make if, you know, something major is happening with the business. But generally they can earn those profits just as easily as you can in this situation. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then during the presentation, the term members was mentioned. Does this mean does this mean it needs to have investors or some others, or is others considered members?
So members are simply people who have become part of this profit sharing arrangement with the LLC. And as I said, they normally contribute something, but like a founder may just sort of say, look, I'm going to be working in this business for, you know, the next few years. I'm going to put in all my, you know, time and expertise and all of this. So I don't actually make any kind of contribution. Maybe I put in $50 or something like that. Well, in that situation, yes, what they are putting in and then what they're getting out is a profit sharing interest. But then there's some people who just, you know, they're not going to be involved in the day-to-day. They're not going to make, you know, any really important decisions, but they're just putting in their capital and then getting a profit share from the LLC as well. And so, yes, I guess I would say a member can be, you know, very active in the business, and that's where they earn their profit share. But then it can also just be people who are investing that can also get a profit share.
Perfect. And the other question is regarding online e-commerce. So the question is, I'm currently a sole proprietor running 2 online distribution businesses. Would it be advisable to form an LLC?
Well, let's see. One thing you would think about is what are the things that you are selling? And of course, if any of the things that you are selling online have any risks involved in them, like food or, you know, something that can go wrong, yeah, I would definitely think of getting a liability shield around you for those kinds of things. Let me see. E-commerce. I'm just trying to think of other aspects that might be relevant for the LLC. The shield, certainly, you know, getting investment and taking on debt. You wouldn't be able to do that as a sole proprietor. Let me see. Those are the main things I would think about: the investment and then the liability shield that wouldn't be there if you just continued as a sole proprietor.
Perfect. And then the other question here is, of course, the question, it's almost like just mentioned as previously, except this time it's a catering bakery business, a food service business. So would it be recommended to form an LLC?
Definitely food. I would say definitely with food, you want to have that limited liability shield around you. Now, again, just to point out that negligence part of it, okay. Let's say that, oh, well, I recall like there was one of our visits that we did with our students was to Clovis Culinary Institute, or whatever it was called, the commercial kitchen there in Clovis. And it was great. And one thing when we went there was they had these, somebody had been creating these gummies that had like alcohol in them. They were like bourbon gummies and stuff. They were delicious. But okay, so let's say you were making those bourbon gummies there at Clovis Kitchen. Okay. All right, so that's what your company does, and you distribute the bourbon gummies, okay, going along. Okay, now let's say that somebody at your kitchen there, oh gosh, one of your workers accidentally knocked a bunch of, you know, cayenne pepper into the mix, and you didn't know about it. Somehow they just accidentally knocked it in or something like that. And some people like burn their mouths from it, something like that. Okay. Well, in that situation, yeah, your worker would be on the hook because they shouldn't have been negligent in that sort of situation there. So maybe they, you know, if you didn't have insurance and couldn't cover the burned mouths and things like that, then they would be on the hook for that. But your business would only be on the hook for essentially your insurance, the amount that you had, and then whatever assets you had. They couldn't get at you personally. over something like that. So again, in a food business, of course, if you were the one who accidentally put the cayenne pepper in, yeah, you'd normally just have to make sure you have enough insurance to cover something like this. But I think with food businesses generally, especially somebody running the business, they're not involved in the day-to-day making of the products or something like that. And if they're not, then this creates more of a shield for you, a backstop of your liability going forward when, somebody's liver or kidney could be, lost and they might sue you for it.
Definitely protection, liability shield, very important. The next question here is regarding an individual that currently has an ITIN number, which is the individual tax identification number. And the question is, if their LLC is valued at $500,000, $500,000, is this helpful when they are looking to receive legal status? Is this like an advantage or benefit?
Ooh, good question. Actually, no. What is valuable, though, is that at a deportation hearing, if somehow the business were to close down and endanger jobs, so maybe there were several people who would lose their jobs, then that is something that the deportation judge can take into account to potentially block the deportation. So it doesn't, no matter how successful you are, doesn't make the U.S. go, oh, well, we ought to give you citizenship status. That's sad, but true. But the fact that you losing the business, you're deported, certain people will be economically affected by it. That could be an important aspect for a deportation judge.
Thank you. And then this other question is regarding someone that's currently an engineering consultant, and they consult to manufacturing companies. And their question is, should they consider forming an LLC? They currently have the local county business license, but their question is about changing their business entity.
Yeah, well, this is where AB5 potentially is going to be drying up a lot of the work that consultants are doing, and this is an easy way for you to show that you are what's called an independent business under AB5 that then could qualify as your business advising and consulting with another business. Then you don't have to worry about this ABC test so much. And you also don't have to worry about them, and they, people hiring you don't have to worry about you coming back and going, oh, well, I should have been your employee. They can hire you with much more confidence if you are a business yourself. And sole proprietors, unfortunately, the big fallout under AB5 was that the self-employed are being seen as suspect now for contracting jobs. There's a sense of, well, maybe now you're okay with me hiring you at less than minimum wage, but maybe down the way you won't be. And so, gee, I should be hiring somebody else instead who's more like a business instead of a single person.
Yeah, thank you. And then just in general, at what point should a sole proprietor business consider changing entities from sole proprietor to an LLC?
Well, I mean, all of those aspects that I covered before, I mean, if you're wanting to get some investment, yeah, people can, generally investors can't invest in other people. They can only invest in entities. Similarly with loans, you can take on personally a loan, but banks, I think, generally want to see a company with a track history, something separate from you. Maybe your credit history isn't as great as you'd like it to be. This is a way of starting sort of fresh and having the corporation or the LLC have this new history that can, be the way that you raise capital. Certainly the AB5 aspects I was talking about are important. If you're undocumented, yeah, this may be the only way to raise money on a regular basis without right to work. And then, yeah, I don't know. The downside, of course, there's really two downsides. Well, one downside. One downside is this $800 a year franchise tax that you're going to have to pay. And if you get big, over $250K a year, then there's this receipts tax you also have to cover. But beyond that, you'll still be paying self-employment tax, whether you're a sole proprietor or whether you're an LLC. So I don't really see a lot of advantages to being a sole proprietor. Maybe you feel like you have more autonomy, but if you're a single person, you can do a single member LLC anyway, and you don't have to share any decision making with anybody. So I just think this is, it's sort of like, how would I say, gearing yourself up to get into the market with sort of like an Iron Man suit on or something like this. This is a way that you can get into that market in a much more sort of nimble way that protects you and your family. I just would tend to say that it works for almost anybody.
Anyone. And what is the current time frame of from when they submit the application to when they hear back from the state of California of getting their LLC?
Oh, my understanding is that when you register on the online portal, it's virtually instantaneous. I would say, no more than a couple of days for them to send back a notice saying, "Oh, now you're an LLC in the state of California," and that's when you do your operating agreement. So again, use one of these template forms that we provided in the link that's going to be in the PowerPoint you get.
Perfect. And then how about a single member LLC individual? Do they have to be enrolled in payroll? Should they be documenting showing proof that they're paying themselves?
Oh, no, not at all. Again, because they're just earning profits themselves. If they hire an employee, then yeah, that's one thing. But if they're just paying themselves, no. Just, you would be doing your tax return again with your 1040, your IRS 1040, and your Schedule C, which would identify all the profits and the business costs that you want to take off of your income in order to make that sort of adjusted gross profit or net income. Yeah, but you don't, you're not an employee. You're not earning wages. You're profit share.
Perfect. And then the final question here in the chat box is, can you remind us again, where can participants of today receive more information on limited liability shield?
Oh, sure. Happy to have you sign up for our office hours at any point to talk, more specifically about stuff. We have some information in ollielegal.com. That's our sort of informational website. You can just go and check out anytime. But if you have any specific questions on the limited liability part, yeah, go ahead and sign up for our office hours. This is the link, www.law.berkeley.edu/NBCLC. Our offers are right now we do Mondays and Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I know 11, 12, and 1.
Yeah, 11 to 2. So yeah, just go on there. There's an Eventbrite sign up, and then we can talk to you, more individually for 45 minutes, assuming you can't afford an attorney.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Bill. It looks like that is the end of the questions for today, for today's workshop. And if you're still joined, let us know in the chat box what legal topics you would like to hear from the team at Berkeley Law in the near future. So as a reminder, we meet every third Friday of the month from 1 to 2 p.m. So our next session will be Friday, June 18th. So thank you to each one of you for joining us. Thank you, Bill, for your time. And you'll have a wonderful weekend.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Be safe.